NEWS.MC on Monaco Info is brought to you by Monaco Legend Properties. Our exclusive interview with the personalities making the Principality.
My name is Robert Agostinelli. I'm the co-founder of Rhône Capital. I spent a good portion of my life between Rochester and New York City. I went to Catholic education. I went to a high school called Sacred Heart Cathedral, which was quite famous in that part of the world. When I would get up in the morning, growing up in a very middle-class family, I got on my bike, and as an American, I knew when I got on my bike, I looked at the sunrise and the sunset, and I knew there was nothing that could stop me. America was the American, I lived the American dream. You could do whatever you wanted to do as long as you worked hard, kept your nose clean, and stayed focused straight. And I've always done that. So I had heroes, a lot of heroes when I was growing up. One of my heroes was Douglas MacArthur. He was a great general. He might have been president. He was a great leader. People didn't like him, but I thought Richard Nixon was a great man. You know, John Kennedy at that period of time was also, for young people, an inspiration. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And so I actually wrote an article about him in 1962 with a magazine called Boy's Life, because I was a Boy Scout. So I looked at these people, military heroes, and I've supported the military all my life. Americans that were of that notion and ilk. I studied them hard, studied them long, and emulated them later. My dream was to become a baseball player until I realized I was scouted, but not good enough to do it long term. Later on, when I was in university, I had thought I was going to become a lawyer. I had this vision of becoming a tax lawyer and a tax advisor. Then I realized what lawyers did for a living, and I decided not to do that. And I read an article about Andre Mayer, the financier, the financial genius at Lazard. On my way to Columbia, where I was going to school, I was walking across to pick up a taxi in Upper Manhattan. I looked at that article, an institutional investor, and I said, that's who I want to be. And I did. I was the founder of Goldman Sachs' international business, and I was ultimately recruited by Michel David-Vey at Lazard to join as a partner 5 years later. He made me a partner. I was the youngest partner ever at the time, and I had 10 years there, and I did that. But I realized even then, you graduate from the merger and acquisition advisory business, and you become an adult, and you become a real entrepreneur. And in the middle of my career, my partner and I shocked everybody, and we left, and we started Rhône Group, Rhône Capital, and we were bankers. So we were known for, we were both at Goldman, we were both at Lazard, and suddenly we were on our own. So we had no name. We didn't think the name Agostinelli Langman sounded very inviting, so we called it Rhône, R-H-O-N-E. Why Rhône? Because it was short, sweet, and it didn't offend anyone in Europe. We just looked around Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire and said, what could we call it that would be reflective of European culture, not offend anybody, and also have some sense of secrecy. And we always appealed to industrial families. We called it Rhône. We also needed a name that Americans could pronounce, because Americans don't want something awkward. So if you're in Omaha, Nebraska, you can use Rhône even if they get it wrong. Investment banking, it didn't really exist before we started it. It was a new concept. When I say we were leaders, I remember Fortune magazine coming to write an article about it, and then they came back after they interviewed me and they said, well, we just realized this is not a trend. You actually control 85% of the market, which we did at that time. And so what we did when we started the firm was simply emulate that concept, that we would look for family companies and industrial companies that had a transatlantic feature, and/or it's expanded now to Asia, Northeast Asia in particular. We've done many, many transactions with entrepreneur founders and industrial families. We're a partner with Thomas Floor at VistaJet. We're the second investor in that. There's a group in Vienna and in London called RHI, where we're partners with a prominent Viennese family and a prominent German family, both of which we've known for many years. And very often, when the family actually sells, or by example, we're the second investor in the first outside investor in history in Ely Cafe. So we work with these families as they transition through their generations. And if you're talking about the European side, because we also do it in America, the Europeans, in the old days, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, as you know, most European families did not sell their business. That would be a failure. Unlike in America, that's a success. You sell your company, you make a lot of money, you go to the golf course, you buy a big house in Palm Beach, that's success. You do that in Europe, it's a failure. But now the generational shift has changed. The families don't have the second and third generation or fourth generation that want to continue in the business. The reality in Europe is, without the United States, it's a big problem. The socialism has strangled companies in Europe, and they look either to the US or India or the Gulf, and that's what we provide. We provide expertise and knowledge and years of experience of doing that. if you look at the horizon of business, there's two things that stand out. One is that despite having 350 to 400 million people, Europe is stagnant. It's frankly been stagnant my entire career because of the sclerosis of the European Union, which I hope that institution fails because it deserves to fail. It's failed, at least by my count, 3 generations of young people. That's why they previously went to England before they blew up. They would go to the United States, they would go to Asia, they're now going to the Gulf. The first issue is, how do you give growth? The betterment of humanity, the betterment of mankind requires economic growth. Capitalism has been the engine, and the only engine in the history of mankind that develops that. And if you look at the cycle throughout history, it's only in the last 200 years, and it's because of the ingenuity of ideas and the sharing of ideas and allowing the independent mind and spirit of the individual to grow and develop. That's been limited because there's the rebirth of communism and socialism, which are dead letter societal norms that have been defeated time after time because they failed. Miraculously or not miraculously, that evil's coming back. That's number one problem. Number two, that leaves you with one option. The United States of America still remains the shining city on the hill for most people. Ironically, in the Enlightenment in the Gulf by otherwise despotic states it brought great opportunity at the same time. I mean, what you see MBS doing in Saudi Arabia, what the Royal Crown Prince is doing in the Emirates, at all, they're developing that. And with the Israeli situation being stabilized more through fight and girth and the support of the Trump administration in particular, the United States generally, hopefully that will bring peace, and that's going to bring more prosperity. Technologically, there's an enormous revolution that we all talk about, and I believe very much in it, which is AI. There's a lot of dangers with artificial intelligence, but there's enormous growth that's going to come from it. And it's going to make a lot of dislocation because it's going to take jobs, and people are going to have to reorient themselves. But the growth that should bring and the betterment it should bring, I think has not yet been calculated. So we, by example, we're industrial and service buyers of traditional companies, what do we call the regular GDP of the Western states. Those companies are, and we're working on it right now, are now being affected by AI. So in a sense, when you buy something in the normal economy, the historic economy, today you have to have AI knowledge and capacity, which is growing by the moment and mutating by the moment. I always loved Monaco. Monaco in Europe is the single beacon of freedom and Catholicism, Christianity, and Judeo-Christian ethic freedom that we have. I mean, when you see what's happening in France, it's a disaster. When you see what's happening in the United Kingdom, it's a disaster. You want to go through the list, Belgium, right down the list, there's a whole series of denial of the pedigree and culture and Western thought. Whereas here, there's an insistence by Monsignor to make sure that this reigns supreme. You feel freedom, the same freedom I had on that bicycle in 1958, whatever year it was, 1960 as a kid. I feel that here. That's the same feeling I have here. You have more sunshine you had in New York, but I feel here there's an insistence and a devotion to that ethic. It's a great grounding and predicate. There's only one limitation here, which we all know, which is the size. If this were the size of France, it would be a booming economy. If you applied the principles of Monaco to France, the French don't want to hear this, and I've known a number of presidents in France. I've said this to them often, but it's a systemic problem there. But if this had a larger geographic footprint, the happiness would be enlarged. So I think for the future of Monaco is extraordinarily positive. I think it's going to have more and more young, dynamic people coming to the extent it can happen. I have a lot of investors here. Some of them don't do their investing right out of Monaco per se because they have other operations, but the ownership of assets, the shadow of the influence of the wealth of Monaco far outcasts the size and shape of the place. And I think that's only going to grow. The Emirates, in its own way, is trying to emulate it, but then, if you have a life choice between living there, and I have a golden visa there, and I work there very often, this has back to heritage and culture. You have the religious freedom, you have economic freedom, you have freedom of speech, you have the rule of law. Rule of law is very important. The rule of law and the right to private property are fundamental to freedom. Switzerland, in its own way, had that to a certain extent. They had other issues, but Switzerland is caved in to the pressure from Europe and from the United States, and it's not the same place it was. So when you look, if you're European and you're seeking what we just described, you have essentially two choices: here or you can go to Italy on their new plan. It's going up and up and up, and Giorgio Meloni disappears. Who knows what happens, because the underlying socialism has been there since 1945. Or Singapore, which is in the shadow of China, which is an ornery creature. So this stands out as a beacon of light and freedom. First thing you got to do is you got to do something you like. You have to have joy in what you do. Oh, I want to be a lawyer. Oh, I want to be this. I want to be that. Where they think is safe to be. I would exclude that from my thought and say, who are you? What's your dream? Follow your dream and take risk, number one. Taking risk as a young person is the best time to try it. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I believe that as a young person, you got to follow your generational shift. Let's call it generically technology. I think you have to be au fait and familiar with that and desirous of that. You can do other things, but technology, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in entertainment, whether it's in banking, industry, whatever it is, it's a newfound world, and you have to follow that footprint. If you take that recipe of those three, I think you can make it. My message to anyone who has a dream of being free and wants to live in a European culture, you got one place. It's Monte Carlo.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching NEWS.MC, your English rendezvous on Monaco Info. Discover more interviews and stories on our websites, NEWS.MC and MonacoInfo.com. This show was brought to you by Monaco Legend Properties.